And then if you'd like to speak, just unmute.
All right, thanks, John. Welcome, everyone. Good morning. Thanks for joining me on a Friday. What looks to be somewhat sunny, as you can tell by my somewhat dark Zoom setup because of all the sunshine behind me. My name is Ursula Wilkinson, and I work with Campus Technology Services as an information security analyst. And today I am going to talk about phishing emails and how to spot them. I'm going to share my screen momentarily so that you can take a peek at my, my presentation. Bear with me. I've only done this maybe a handful of times, so bear with me. I practiced a little bit last night, but it's always slightly different when you're on stage, so to speak. So bear with me 1 second. All right, there we are, phishing emails. I don't know if anybody remembers, but I'm just going to give a little bit of introduction and go over our agenda for what we're going to accomplish today. Back in October, hopefully most of you remember, but if not, it was memorable for me anyways. It might not have been memorable for all of you, but October was National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And it is also, October held the second ever phishing simulation test for the campus. We did have one before I joined the campus in 2016. And that one also was a faculty staff wide phishing test. So this one was the second ever that we had ever done. It's important. It was one of the things that, I had honestly wanted to do since joining the campus because phishing remains one of the #1 threats to the security of networks and data. So I wanted to get that going as soon as we possibly could. It takes a few years though. So the results of that test, I can give more information to anybody offline if anybody wants that. Please feel free to reach out to me afterward and I can get you some more information. But our results for that, our report card, so to speak, was about average. Depending on whose numbers you look, there's generally a lot of industry averages out there for this information in terms of higher ed and just in general education. We're about average or maybe slightly worse than average with that. So obviously we see that as an opportunity. And we wanted to use this opportunity to get in on the winter breakout sessions and kind of share some more information about that phishing email and hopefully get some people some more information about what they could have done differently about that email. So here I am. And that kind of segues perfectly into the learning outcomes for this. Hopefully you'll walk away from today's session with a greater understanding of what a phishing email looks like and some of the characteristics of an email that would make it sort of fishy. And hopefully today, because of maybe some of the challenges that people might have had with that phishing email, you'll walk away from the session with a greater idea on how to set up your browsers to properly prepare you to look at an email. And then for anyone that primarily checks their email on a mobile device, there will be some different tips and tricks for you on basically what you should do differently perhaps than if you're primarily using a desktop, and what you actually can and can't do from your mobile email client to scrutinize an email, because they are different. So when we designed this email, obviously we didn't want to make it perfectly obvious that it was a phishing email, but we didn't want to make it so perfect that everyone fell for it. So when I reflect on what actually happened with this email, I came to the conclusion, there were 4 main things about this email that made me think these are the things that might have gotten someone if they clicked the link. And we'll take a peek at it in a few slides. The sender seemed legitimate for this email. I don't know if anybody remembers it. you'll see it in a little bit, but it seems like it could have been a legitimate sender. It wasn't something like business1234@yahoo.com. It seemed it was an Oswego address, seemed legitimate. The email, and again, we'll look at all of this later on, but it created a really high kind of important sense of urgency. It was basically, you know, a notification that, hey, your account was included in some of these hacks and you should change your password. It sounded kind of scary. It had a kind of scary sounding organization name mentioned in it, which actually does exist, but that sense of urgency was kind of important. And you'll find out, as I'll touch on later, that's one of the keys to a phishing email. There weren't that many errors in the email too. Again, we were trying to walk this fine line between perfectly obvious and perfect, because we had originally designed it to be perfect. And we took a step back and we said, we got to give them a few more hints that this might not be good. So we purposely inserted a few errors, but there weren't that many. So it was pretty convincing. And you know, to be fair to a lot of people, it can be difficult to try to look at an email and see some of the characteristics that make them fishy. Just from a technical standpoint, viewing the email on your mobile device in a browser, sometimes it isn't always easy and it takes a couple extra steps to check out an email. So unless you actually do those steps or know that you need to do those steps, it might not have been apparent that some of these characteristics were fishy. So to be fair, you know, there were reasons, and based on what I know about the email and designing the phishing email, these are the more likely reasons that somebody might have clicked on this. So without further ado, let's take a look at it. But before that, I just want to preface how I'm going to describe this email with a little bit of, I'll call it Ursula lingo. I tend to describe phishing emails and characteristics using like flags, like racing flags, red flag, yellow flag. Yellow flag is exactly what it means: proceed with caution. If you see if I call something a yellow flag when describing a phishing email, it means, all right, this should, put your back up against the wall. Maybe you should use a little caution. Let's look for other clues in the email. We need to go slowly with this one and maybe just stop. And then red flag is a full stop. Okay. All right. Yep. This is definitely not something that I want to click on. This definitely looks risky. But if you aren't sure, or even if you are sure and you maybe want to report it, you should contact the CTS help desk for assistance. These are hard stops. Somebody else needs to probably know about this. This is something I definitely shouldn't click on, do anything about, like within the email, and somebody else probably should know that I've received this email so that if anybody else gets it, they can take some action. And for the most part, I have to use these characteristics and I have to kind of categorize them as this, because there isn't always a red flag smoking gun that automatically means a phishing email is a phish. Sometimes you'll see maybe 3 yellow flags in an email, but it is a phishing email. So there isn't always one particular characteristic of an email that makes it fishy, but the more yellow flags and red flags you see, the more kind of certain you become that something is phishing. So let's take a peek at the email. I think I have it open here. Can everybody see this? Nod if you can, or speak up, please. I want to make sure. Yes. Okay. Okay. Good. All right. So this was the email. All right. And I want to just start, with the first thing that I would have seen if I were looking at this. Okay. So the first thing that I see is it's from Campus Technology Services, and then this bracket here, the sender email address says cts@oswego.edu. Have I ever seen an email from cts@oswego.edu? Let me think. I don't know that I have. So this right here is a yellow flag. All right. This isn't something that I've ever seen. I don't think that CTS sends emails from, and I'm thinking in my head as a normal person, I don't think CTS uses this email address to send out communication. I think it's usually from help@oswego.edu. I don't know that that the communications department uses this either. So this is a yellow flag, all right? And in fact, most communications do come out from the help desk address at oswego.edu, official communications from CTS. Often CTS partners up with the communications and marketing department for communications, and those will go out to the various announcement lists and listservs. Very rarely, to the point where it should be a yellow flag. Various CTS staffers will send out emails, but again, yellow flag. So the sender right here is a yellow flag. I'm reading this here. I'm not going to read it verbatim, but this is what it looks like. Let's see. I know that there's, I have a spelling mistake here. Credentials is misspelled. There's an I missing. Here's another spelling mistake. Password with one S. Oops. Well, all right. And here's a capitalization mistake. That's a little strange. All right, so not a ton of mistakes, but I feel like this email probably would have been looked at by a few people. So I feel like those mistakes probably would have gotten picked up if they were legitimate. So all right, another yellow flag. So we're up to 2 yellow flags with this. And I will say that we've all gotten phishing emails that are that are full of grammatical errors, and it's pretty apparent that it was written by a non-native speaker of English. But I can tell you that the people who are doing this are getting better and better all the time. And there are a lot of well-written phishing emails that come out that I see in my day-to-day work. So you can't assume that all phishing emails are just going to be really poorly written, because they aren't. A lot of them, and they're getting better all the time. The scammers, they change their tactics. If it requires maybe hiring a not so moral native speaker of English to write these emails for them for $20, they're going to do it and just go from there. So you can't always expect the phishing emails to be poorly written. So yellow flag there. Occasionally mistakes happen, but the fewer mistakes, it's a yellow flag. And what is this scary sounding organization here that's mentioned? Research and Education Network Information Sharing and Analysis Center, Ren Isaac. Well, I can tell you that exists. It sounds very official. It is related to cybersecurity. So it's a kind of intimidating sounding name. And it's telling me that my account login credentials were found on a list of breach credentials. Ooh, that doesn't sound good. That sounds like I need to change my password. So it sounds like they're telling me I need to change my password. That sounds kind of urgent. All right. And I will say sense of urgency. All right. That is one of the number one things about an email, or basically any type of a con that's ever been created, is a fishy characteristic. If someone's trying to create the sense of urgency that you need to take action now, what they're doing is it's a psychological trick to try to get you to act without thinking. All right. Classic phishing. With this, it's like I said, it's a very intimidating sounding, official sounding organization giving you a notification that your account credentials at these places have been compromised and you need to do a password reset. Again, this is just a yellow flag. I wish I could say that all types of notifications from places are phishing emails, but they're not, because oftentimes, when places get breached, they do send notifications out to email, sometimes perhaps to alternate email addresses for people. So they do, it isn't automatically, again, a smoking gun that says this is a phishing email. You do have to do a little bit of research. There are safer ways to handle, the sense of urgency than what this email is telling you need to do. And I just popped up the chat. Someone mentions that the Oswego EDU part of the email address makes it very difficult to tell that this one is fishy. Yes. The the oswego.edu portion, what you see there in the brackets, that one is another one of those characteristics that you can see, but I can tell you as someone who used to create these phishing campaigns, that is very easily spoofed, and that is 100% what happened in this scenario. It's easily faked. So you can't always trust what that says. And again, you know, someone who doesn't know our organization very well might have used CTS of oswego.edu, not knowing that CTS doesn't use that for sending notifications. But again, this is one of those things that you have to look at, assess. Is it yellow? Is it good? Is it red? And then kind of take the entire email in before you can really assess what's going on with this. Again, easily faked. You can put, there are tools out there that allow you to fake this and put in whatever you want. And honestly, there are legitimate tools that do that, because many of our campus systems, email systems with student accounts and financial aid and auxiliary services do in fact have tools, and they purposely will put in auxiliary services at oswego.edu, even though it's not coming directly from SUNY Oswego. So there are legitimate reasons for doing this, but you have to take this again with a grain of salt. And someone's jumping ahead and kind of stealing my thunder with the links and hovering over. So I'm going to get to that very shortly. In fact, it's the next thing I'm going to touch on. So I'm reading this. I've noticed the sender address, the official email. Let's see, what else are we looking at? Oh, it's okay. I'm sorry, I'm kidding. I tend to have a sense of humor. I'm trying to, you know, information security can sometimes be very serious. I try to approach it from a lighthearted standpoint. So please, no, there's no need to apologize. But it was the next thing coming up. So it was probably a perfect segue. So they're saying we need to change our password. All right, so we're looking at this. Please change your password immediately. Yikes. All right, you can do so. They're being helpful. Here's the link. All right, what do we have here? All right, oswego.edu/admin. That seems somewhat familiar. I see this hover context menu is popped up with the gray background and the white text. It says HTTP. HTTP, that doesn't sound right, but oswego.edu/admin. All right, that's the same thing that's being displayed here. But take a peek at the bottom left of my browser window. Hopefully that appears to everyone. It says open, and it's got this, you know, it's got the URL quoted in quotes. It says HTTPS blackboardinfo.us:8080/awesome and a whole bunch of other things. That sounds very, very strange. Blackboardinfo.us. That domain sounds completely foreign to me. I've never heard of that. I mean, I've heard of Blackboard, but I don't. Info.us is .us may or may not be a valid top level domain like .com or .edu. I don't know about that. So that is very, very suspicious. And indeed, that's a red flag. Okay, you have to make sure. And I'll cover this a little. I'll reiterate this later on, but hovering over when you get this context menu, you can't always trust this context menu to give you all of the information that you need. You really have to have that status bar enabled at the bottom of your browser, particularly in Safari, which is what I'm using, to be able to see what the actual link destination is. The general guidance previously was hovering would show you, and indeed it does in most browsers, but it doesn't always do it. It doesn't always show you the link destination where you'd expect in that context menu. You have to look at the status bar down below to actually see the entire link. Has anybody, well, that's kind of a moot point at this point, but that just seems very strange. Awesome 49 ? D. Yeah, this is not something that seems very strange. So yeah, that would be a red flag. I wish I could go a little bit more in depth into dissecting this entire URL, because there is more to it and it might seem kind of extremely technical. And, you know, I'm trying to make it, I'm trying to make this understandable to a wide audience. And I don't know how technical some of you are. Some of you may know exactly what's wrong with this link and how to check, you know, because there's a very critical bit in this link that kind of is the part that you need to pay attention to the most. And it's a little bit beyond the scope of this, but the important thing is it's blackboardinfo.us. And that's the part that you want to pick out, and you want to say, no, that's not something I'm familiar with. That's not good. The one important thing to remember is, and some of you may have noticed this, and some of you may have actually noticed it with our HR communication emails when it comes to training. Very often, emails that come from marketing platforms, if you do this trick with this hover, right? Like they show you some text on the link, but then you look at it and it's got a whole string of characters, and there's all sorts of information in there. What those communication and marketing emails are doing, those links actually have trackers built in so that they can tell that Ursula Wilkinson actually clicked that link from the email. So, as much as I say this is a red flag, this one's actually fairly easy to discern that it's a full stop with the blackboardinfo.us. But with some of the marketing emails that you may receive that have these tracking links in them, might be a little bit harder to tell. So this is where you would have to rely on some of those other clues and those other characteristics about the email before clicking the links. And you can always, and there are other ways for checking out links that are safe as well, if you perhaps need to do that. And there are other ways to get assistance with this too. And some of you may use YAM. If anybody has, and you've ever actually seen what some of the recipients get, there's a tracking link in those links that are in those emails as well. And that's how YAM actually compiles the information about who opened, who clicked, who responded, etc. I don't have a screenshot of where this actually went, but if you had opened it up, it would have been a very poor copy of our authentication webpage for like Blackboard. In CTS, we call it our CAS login page because that's the name of the service that actually performs the authentication, but it does authentication for various different services. It might have been very difficult to tell it was a poor copy had you been opening this on a mobile device. I didn't actually get to do that. And I apologize, I didn't get a screenshot of it, but it was a very, very simplified, actually I do have a picture of it. I don't know if I'll be able to find it easily, but it's not a very elegantly constructed copy of our login page. So it should have, whereas our login page kind of automatically would float some of the login boxes, this one kind of left justified them all, and then it just looked very, very sloppy, very poorly done. That was intentional and also not intentional, because we wanted it to be, again, somewhat obvious that, this wasn't legitimate, but also not completely believable. So again, that one should have given pause too. And indeed, we did get feedback from people reporting this to the help desk that they did notice that the login page didn't seem right either. Obviously we didn't want people to get that far, but if they stopped at that point, that's still better, I guess, than actually putting in a username and password there, because that's what you would have done at this login page, because we're taking you there purportedly to change your password. But if you had stopped at that point, that's still better than going the full route with that. So let's see if we can go back to the presentation here. So to summarize what was fishy about that, the sender address we talked about, actually unfamiliar, not something I've ever seen before, easily faked, that's a yellow flag, all right? The handful of typographical errors, they're not really grammar errors, but they're more like typographical errors, also a yellow flag. Human beings make mistakes. But there were 3 of them, and likely, for something of this size, it's probably a template notification that goes out. It's not likely to have too many errors. Again, yellow flag, you have to keep looking. The sense of urgency it creates, notifications do sometimes come in, and sometimes they are actionable and legitimate. So again, have to look at the other clues about the phishing email to determine whether or not it's actually suspicious. The red flag, that link. Hopefully all of you have that. If most browsers have it set up so that it will show you that destination, but the hover context menu doesn't always show you. But hopefully it seems apparent that blackboardinfo.us is not something that's legitimate, even though it does use the word Blackboard. But hopefully everybody understands that that's not something that CTS or SUNY Oswego would be using for a password reset tool. And then, again, we discussed how the destination website was just not, it was poor quality, a poor imposter for our actual login page. And again, please jump in if anybody has questions. Oh, didn't mean to do that. And again, it might not have been immediately apparent how, depending on what kind of a device you looked at these emails with. So I want to touch on that because that was one of the things that I think maybe people might have struggled with, because it can be difficult, and depending, if you're using Safari, for instance, like I did, it's possible to set up the browser in a way that you can't see that bottom status bar and see that destination link. So, I wanted to talk about that briefly. Well, not briefly. Hopefully you all have questions about this. So, and please, again, jump in with the chat anytime. And one thing to know when you're actually using a browser, they actually function mostly the same on both mobile devices and desktops. That's on purpose so that there can be a consistent user experience between the different devices. I don't know that I would generally recommend trying to view email in a browser on a mobile device because it can be a bit clumsy, because you're trying to do either you're using the stylus or you're using your fingers to try to zoom in and potentially look at things. So it can be a bit clunky, but it is possible to do. And they function largely the same. So anything that I'm telling you can do in a desktop browser, you can probably do it on the mobile browser as well. It's just going to be a little bit more difficult, a little more clumsy. Potentially, you don't want to do it just because it is clumsy, or you may accidentally click the link when you don't really want to. But at least you can get a better view of the email that way. Many times in emails, you'll notice that these links are actually shortened URLs. Hopefully you've seen some of these. They have bit.ly. YouTube has their own version, Google has their own version, but they're all shortened URLs. And the purpose of those is to take a whole long string of text and shorten it up. Sometimes for the purpose of obfuscation and security reasons, but sometimes it's just for marketing purposes and it looks cleaner. But those you would definitely want to check out before you click on them. And there are some services out there that you can put a shortened URL into. It'll expand that out for you. And then you can do that assessment of the domain and all the other characteristics of that full URL. If you remember, ours had like blackboardinfo.us:8080/. There's a lot of stuff to unpack there. And again, it's outside the scope, but if you were to shorten that with a bit.ly link, it would just say bit.ly/ and a few characters. So definitely, one of them looks meh and one of them definitely looks suspicious. So you want to make sure that you're expanding those out before you click on them. All of these work to expand the URLs. So I highly recommend doing that. If you're checking out a link and you're not sure about it, expand it out, know for sure. There are actually also websites, once you've expanded that shortened URL, you can actually copy what it's been expanded to, and then check out that full URL as well. And also just regular domains, if you're not sure, like that blackboardinfo.us, you can check that out as well. There's a couple of resources here. One that I use is called VirusTotal, and I've provided the link there if anybody wants it. You can copy a full URL, or you can check out just a domain there, like oswego.edu if you want. But it's really handy. It kind of goes there and checks out the website. And again, none of these things are perfect, okay? There's never ever going to be a perfect solution for any of these things, but it will go out and check out the website for you. There are other ones. This is the main one that I use here. There's another one called scanurl.net. Also similar functionality. Will go and make sure that you aren't going to a malicious website. And then if you want to know who actually owns a domain, you know, that blackboardinfo.us portion or that oswego.edu portion of the URL, I highly recommend going to whois.com. And then you can type in it'll search the browser, it'll search the domain for you. And you can find out who has it registered, because that can be a clue too, whether or not a website or a domain is being used for malicious purposes. That again, slightly out of scope. There's a whole presentation of its own in there in that, but I wanted to give you some quick and dirty tools that you go and check these out. And again, as I mentioned before, hovering over a link, which is the conventional wisdom, doesn't always show you everything where you would expect to see it. You really need to have that status bar kind of popping up for you. And if it's not enabled, then you need to enable it. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I thought my computer might have frozen for a moment. It still looks like it might be.
Definitely your PowerPoint.
Yes, for sure. Let's see. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and see if I can wake it up. Bear with me. Isn't technology wonderful? Well, I actually opened up several browsers so that I could demonstrate what the status bar would look like. And I think that might be the problem here. So why don't I show you the email in a different browser, and maybe I can close the browser at that point, and then, oh dear, oh dear. Safari is just completely frozen on me, so I'm going to quit that. So I apologize for that. So while my computer catches up here, I'll just talk for a few minutes. For the most part, the browsers should automatically be set up for you, except for Safari. By default, Firefox, Chrome, Edge, and IE all should have that that bottom status bar that pops up when you hover over a link. The context menu may not show you the correct thing, but that bottom status bar definitely will. And that's what you'll want to actually look at, and not necessarily the context menu. So you definitely want to take a peek at that. Let's see. All right, so Safari stopped. Let me show you just in Chrome what this looks like. So let's see, share screen. Let's see. All right, so here's what it looks like in Chrome. Very, very similar. And in fact, you do get the hover menu as well. It does pop up here, and you do see it in the very bottom, that blackboardinfo.us. That's what it looks like in Chrome. It isn't that much different. Again, because the browsers all function similarly. And they will on desktops. It's a little bit easier to do on a desktop than it is on a mobile device. So seeing what we see here, the other thing I would show you maybe too, someone mentioned it's a little bit difficult to see some of the sender address information sometimes too. Using Chrome, and actually this is what this will look like. There's this little drop-down menu here that will give you some additional information about the sender. This particular bit of information here that I'm highlighting, the from field, this is what's called the friendly name or the friendly from. Again, completely spoofable, completely just can be faked. But this is supposedly what the actual email address of the friendly from sender is. This would be the name, like Ursula Wilkinson, and this would be the email address. Again, completely fakeable. But it is helpful to look at this. It can't always be trusted. You hope that you would, but again, it's one of those things that you have to look at when assessing the email as a whole. So that's there. Again, it looks the same, and hopefully it would have, people would have hovered over this and not necessarily looked at the context menu. So now that I showed that to you in Chrome, I'm going to quit Chrome so that I can go back to my presentation. So let's see, let's bring Safari back up. When we're talking about the browsers as opposed to the mobile devices, the mobile devices are a bit more difficult to look at links inside of. And I guess probably if you're going to remember one rule about doing this on your smartphone or your tablet, make sure that you are, if you come across something and you're reading an email, you're not 100% sure if it's legitimate. Okay, it's got a sense of urgency. I have to change my password right away. Do I want to do it here? Okay, the answer is no. Okay, at this point, if you're doing it on your phone and you're like, oh gosh, I got to change my password now, take a breath. All right, wait a minute. Sense of urgency. I don't recognize the sender. Can't really tell what this link is. It looks somewhat familiar, but I don't know. All right, you know what? Let me stop. I realize, I'm in the car, whatever. I'm going to stop and open up a computer. The next chance I get, I'll open this email and I'll take a peek at it there. And I can look at the link a little bit easier. I can take any action I need. It'll be easier to search for any additional information using the browser tools if I need to. But the answer is, if it's raising these red flags for you, maybe don't do it in the mobile device. Maybe wait, open a desktop browser and do what you need to do there. That's probably the simplest rule of thumb that I can give you, just because, the browsers and the mobile, the email clients on the mobile devices don't always work the same. And some of them actually don't have capabilities for previewing links at all. So that's something that, it's a shortcoming of the technology. So if it ever comes down to it, pause, go to a computer, open it up in a browser and look at it there. Very rarely is there going to be anything so urgent that you can't take that amount of time to do that. And that's where that sense of urgency comes in. It's probably being manufactured to get you to act without thinking, and that's why you want to stop, wait, go to maybe a desktop browser and do it there. Almost back into the presentation. I think I might have covered most of the main points, but let me just collect my thoughts here with the presentation. Does anybody have any questions about anything I've said so far while I'm doing that? Okay. Oh, it looks like there might be something in the chat, but that was. Chrome is such a resource hog. All right, so we're back to, this is where we left off. So again, this is the point I was trying to make, is desktop browsers are going to be your go-to for if you really need to investigate an email, you really can't tell, you're not really sure, if stop, look at it here, not really sure what you're looking at, pause, open it up in a desktop browser and look at it here. The only exception to that bottom status bar is Safari, and it's called the status bar in Safari, and you can hide it. It's in the view menu of Safari. If you ever need to check and see whether or not you have that turned on, that's where you go to check. You can either show or hide it. All of the other browsers, as I mentioned, have that enabled. It's kind of difficult to enable or to disable for obvious reasons. So that should be set up for success for you already. And that's the part that you want to trust. And as I also mentioned this, the native email apps, if you're looking at your iOS device, it does have its own built-in email client. Samsung, other devices, they do have built-in email clients now that are kind of pre-installed on the devices. Those don't come with link previewing capabilities, which is really unfortunate. iOS does have a preview feature, but and I'll talk about it in a minute, but it's not as good as you might like. For those, we are a Google campus, and I personally use the Gmail Google app. That is better, particularly on Android, but when you're talking about iOS versus Android with the Gmail app, they do work slightly differently. So they don't, it's not always a consistent type of a functionality between the two of them. The underlying kind of lesson here is to learn what kind of device you have and learn what you can do to check out these links in a safe way. These things changed often enough where, you know, particularly the iOS version, the native version, the native apps on these devices, so that, you know, I could tell you something today and a month from now it might not be true. So, you know, it's your technology, just as you would, you know, learning about the car that you drive and how to maintain it. You know, these are the things that you kind of take on the responsibility for when you own them. Get to know your device and how to do these things on your device. Google is a great resource. I know a lot of people don't like to participate in Google, but there are other search engines available out there to look for information. But you know, the underlying lesson, learn it and learn how to do these things in your device, because they are important. It would have been an interesting research point to find out what percentage of people actually viewed the phishing email on their mobile device versus a desktop browser, and then what subsets of each actually click the link and then put in the sets of credentials. It would have made education a bit more valuable, because we could have then targeted certain things for certain groups perhaps, or created content for certain things. But you know, it's a bit tricky to do those kinds of things when you're just getting started with a program. But it would have been nice to know that information, because then we could have looked also to see, was there something about the email? Was there something about a browser? Is there something about you know, an Apple device that makes it harder? So I kind of had to guess for the most part, but I assume, you know, the technical side at least was a challenge for some people. On Android, the Gmail app functions really well, and you can get link previews that don't actually download anything from the website. You actually get a text preview of the link. In order to get that, you open up the email in the Gmail app on your device. Okay, you go to the link, and don't just do a quick tap. You do a long tap on the link, and then you'll get a pop-up window that appears on there. And the text at the top is actually the link destination. It'll have the HTTPS. If it's a really long link, it won't have everything, but it should be enough to contain the domain, you know, that blackboardinfo.us, that's the main thing that you're looking at, the top level domain of the link. If it doesn't, if you can't see the top level domain in the link, that should, you know, raise your suspicions. Geez, this is a really long link. I can't even find out what the main domain is. So again, always looking at multiple aspects of the email. But the very first thing that pop-up menu will show you is the link destination. It'll have other things. You can copy the URL text if you want to then, you know, paste it into whois.com, that one website that I mentioned to check things out. or you can put it into VirusTotal to check it out. So, that is one thing that's the Android. It's probably, and I'm slightly biased when it comes to Android and the Gmail app, but it honestly is one of the easier ways to check it out and one of the safest manners, because you don't actually get full downloads of anything from the website. iOS, there is some link previewing capability in iOS, but it isn't as good, and it does actually generate like a thumbnail preview. From a cybersecurity standpoint, I'm not a huge fan of that, because that means that my device is actually communicating with that web server, and I don't know potentially what kind of malicious files might be coming down. So I don't really necessarily like that. It is a preview of sorts, and I suppose it's better than nothing, but I still would rather be able to copy the link text and maybe check it out with my own methods rather than have the phone do that. And that's why I prefer how the Gmail app on Android handles it rather than iOS. And again, if you can't really look at these links on your mobile device, stop. Whatever it is can wait till you check these out on a desktop. But if you really don't have the time for that, or perhaps you just can't tell, by all means, give the CTS help desk a call. We're more than happy to assist you with this. Everyone there is trained to know how to look at links and to tell you what needs to be done. If they don't know, they can ask. I'm probably the next tier up for that. But they've seen a lot of links, and they're familiar with what a lot of our constituents receive in terms of emails. So they've seen, any of our systems that send potentially suspicious looking emails, they've seen them already. They can answer your questions. By all means, if you can't figure it out, or you don't have the time to look, or you can't for whatever reason, either you send us an email or give us a call, and we'll assist you with that. Better to ask, 100%, always better to ask than to accidentally click or accidentally do, and then, because at that point, the cat's out of the bag, right? It's already, the bad guy's already won if you click the link and you've put in your credentials. So better to ask the question and have somebody say, yes, it's safe, and then you can proceed. I don't really know if I have any more time for examples, but I'll just show you, these are just some examples of emails that we've gotten that are phishing emails. These have different types of again, tactics. Sure, like this one's supposedly, this one I didn't have the header information for, but this one I can tell you was not from Deborah Stanley. I want to say the sender email address on this one was prez1012@gmail.com or something like that. Definitely not something President Stanley would be using to contact people. So it's very, again, it's Deborah Stanley, creates a sense of urgency. But, again, if you'd seen the header email address and the sender email address there, sometimes the bad guys don't bother to spoof the sending email address, and it's something fairly obviously bad, like prez123@gmail.com. So, they don't always do that. Sometimes they do bother to spoof it, but if it does say that, thank you. All right, I know for a fact that this one isn't legitimate. Again, another one, just really quickly, I'm currently tied up in a seminar right now, and I need you to help me with something important. Okay, that's the sense of urgency that we're talking about here. Again, I didn't provide the header information here, but more than likely this came from something that was not a legitimate SUNY Oswego email address. And we highly encourage everyone to use official email addresses for this. But again, sense of urgency, and familiarity with the sender information. If anybody wants to practice, their phishing identification skills, we do have some quizzes available collected at the CTS phishing site, which is here for you. We didn't create these, but we've kind of curated several of these, and some of them are very, very good. Some of them are a bit dated, some of them are a little bit better than others, but I highly recommend, if anybody wants practice with these, maybe do one a month or one a week or something, and then come back to them so that you can practice. Because just as with anything, it's a skill, and you get better with it and better at it if you practice. And if anybody has any more questions, please, we've got some more questions. Let's see, I don't know, maybe something in the chat. Yeah, Sarah has brought up that, you know, there has been some imposter email addresses used for phishing scams. That's, I'm sure, what the Mary Canal, well, I'm not 100% sure if either of those were that particular scenario, but it's happened not only to Sarah, but to several other people, where they create, you know, an ursula.wilkinson.oswego.edu@gmail.com address. And then, you know, we have our departmental staff pages, staff directories listed. So they'll pretend to be, for me, like perhaps it would be Michael Pisa, because he's an associate director for CTS. You know, they'll create a michael.pisa.oswego.edu@gmail.com and then send it to everybody that reports to Mike Pisa in the org chart. So that's been happening. And another reason why we encourage people to not use personal email addresses for any kind of legitimate college business, because we want to make sure that we're encouraging, you know, if we can tell people to expect emails from oswego.edu, if they get things from gmail.com addresses, you know, that's one of those things, one of those tools that they can use to identify phishing emails. So I thank everyone for their attendance. Again, I didn't leave a ton of time for questions, but my contact information is there. Please feel free to reach out to me after the presentation with any other suggestions or concerns, questions, or feedback about phishing, or if you have any other ideas about presentations you'd like to see. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I'll stop the recording.